the next one.
So he comes back with his letter and he says, I am determined to get this book published. And I know, because Orbis Books has a distribution contract, we don't do our own distribution. It's done by Westminster John Knox Press, which at the time was a fairly new combination of two Presbyterian presses, because the Presbyterian Church had divided over slavery before the Civil War. There was a Northern Presbyterian and Southern Presbyterian. They just 5 or 6 or 7 years, well, maybe 10 years before, rejoined to become the United Presbyterian Church. So the John Knox Press, which was the Southern Presbyterian Church Press, and the Westminster Press, which was the Northern one, had joined. And so he says, Westminster John Knox Press does our distribution. And so I know the editor's there, and I'm going to send it with a cover letter from me explaining the situation and suggesting that they consider it for their list. And I thought, and then I went and looked at their list. Westminster, when it was just Westminster, had in the early 70s published the first book saying that probably, Christian teaching about homosexuality was probably wrong. Way back in 1970-71. And
the Dark Ages.
And they had published 2 or 3 other books of that kind. It wasn't a new or hot topic for them. So within 3 or 4 months, I get this letter back from West, but I still didn't think anything was going to happen. So I get, within 2 or 3 months, I get this letter really cordial letter from Westminster saying, this manuscript was passed on to us by Orbis, and we're going to publish it. Yeah. And the funny thing was, there was one final section. There was actually one short section over which we had a certain amount of debate with the editor. And in retrospect, at the time I was annoyed about it because I thought they just weren't getting it. In retrospect, when I think about it, and I ended up sort of rewriting it, in retrospect I think they weren't getting it because I hadn't expressed myself very well. It was badly written. But there was some sort of ideological quality to the thing too. But anyway, so we signed the contract.
Look forward to our 35th anniversary.
Royalty. And everything is fine. And about a month later, I get another letter back from Westminster from one of their lawyers. This is probably not going to go anywhere. But I just feel obliged to ask. When we drew up this contract, we gave you a larger percentage of royalty than we ever do with first-time authors. And would you by any chance be willing to accept 5% less? And I wrote back and said, I really just don't think I will.
The letter capitalist after all, too.
The letter that came, they offered it to me and agreed to it, and they'd signed the contract. And the letter that came was so sheepish, it was obvious that they weren't going to, pull out of the deal or anything like that. They just, were trying to sort of cover their butts by saying, well, we tried to, to the business manager, whoever who had noticed the error, well, we tried to get it to accept 12.5% instead of 15 to 16% or whatever.
How did it sell?
It's still selling, believe it or not. But, in 10 copies a year, 15 copies a year, and it's never done more than probably 30 copies a year. There was actually a slight boom year before last, and I have no idea why.
Well, with the passing of the law in Iowa.
Well, no, this was before that. It was a little bit before that. I actually think, as far as I can tell, and I don't know exactly, obviously, who buys it, but you can tell at what rate it was sold. So, if it's sold in bulk, the sales price is less, and so I'm getting a percentage of a smaller sales price. And when that happens, my assumption is, particularly based on the number, it's usually like 15 or something.